Ta-da! Good afternoon and welcome to the Midday Show. Just after midday on Wednesday, and I'm really looking forward to getting our guest on. A really fascinating lady. I've been reading her book, and we'll just do a few hellos and say hi to a few folks. And somebody's ringing me. Liz, if you're ringing me to tell me that something about the Midday Show, it's all right. I'm on it. Thank you very much indeed if you tuned into this. Otherwise, I will speak to you at 1 o'clock, unless it's a dire emergency, in which case feel free to ring. Okay. Yes, I would interrupt the show for a dire emergency, but probably not for anything else. I can now see you on the screen. Hello, I'm here. It's okay. Thank you for that. Robert Van Buren tuned in, always the first on the timeline. Good to see you, RVB. We're talking to an author today, really fascinating lady. We talk a lot about mental health on this show as well, and well-being and all that sort of stuff, and stuff we've learned, and it all kind of fits in. So I'm going to bring her straight on stage. But before we do, a quick random appearance from Liz Moore. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Is that why you were ringing me, to tell me I wasn't on air? But I am on air. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye. Right, good. Let's get her on. Clea Myers. Hello, how are you?
Hello, Neil. I'm very well, thank you. Very well.
Absolutely lovely to have you on the show. I hope you've got a copy of your book that you can hold up and show us all.
Oh, I do.
Of course you do. Of course you do. Some boys I knew.
You have to do all this thing, and you have to make sure you're not covering. I mean, it's
there is a way when you get on the book circuit tour. There is the way of holding them. Yeah, it's a new move you have to make, isn't it? It's kind of it.
Because you're struggling as an author now. You know, there's thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of new books coming out every week. Mm-hmm. So, which is great. I mean, wonderful. But yeah, you got to be vocal about what you're doing. So thank you for having me.
Well, yes, here is one said platform to be very vocal about what you're doing. So tell us all about your book. I'm gonna frame it in a particular way in just a minute, kind of from the angle that we do things on the Midday Show. But just in your own words, welcome to the show and tell us about your book.
Well, so I actually started writing a fiction after my first book came out, which was about my crystal meth addiction when I lived in Hollywood. I went to live the dream, but experienced the nightmare. So, and that was about raising awareness around crystal meth and that journey. So obviously I was trying to, come up with a second book, and I was writing this novel, fiction, but it just kept I just kept thinking, no, I want to write about my experiences. And I wasn't quite sure at that point why. My experiences with men, which according to the book, we know have not been terribly successful on the whole.
Well, they've been quite colourful, shall we say, from what I've read.
Yeah, colourful, yeah. And I don't have a type. But it's so I really wanted to get into look at why there had been these series of, dysfunctional relationships.
So it was a question of really a biography and a kind of bit of self-inquiry as well, kind of self-inquiry out loud, if you like.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I love telling stories, whether it's or writing, script writing or acting. And yeah, I felt it did feel like a mission within me. And I wanted it to, because I was living with a lot of shame around being middle-aged, single, no kids. And sometimes people people can be, there are these questions that can be asked, say in a social situation.
I know the type. I know the type. And and the people that ask those questions normally have absolutely no clue about your life, no clue about your backstory. They've just got a kind of stereotype of what everyone's, including their life, should look like. Am I right?
Yeah, exactly. Like this kind of thing. Like they're looking at me so. Oh, right. So, okay. So not being married is not an issue these days because, we all have partners, right?
Yep. I'm not married. No big deal there.
No big deal. I know I've got no issue with that. But it's the thing with, oh, so you don't have children. And they're looking at you like, oh, did you not want them? Or, and it's like, which is a really deeply personal question, because people don't know what the hows and whys are around that.
No, and a little bit patronizing as well, I find, with these people. Almost this kind of simply, oh, that's a shame.
Yeah.
Oh, it's kind of that, isn't it?
That
And
is.
it's if it wasn't so well intended and illegal, you'd probably want to slap them,
Well, it has created quite a sort of reactionary, like their groups, say on Facebook and other social media, where like childless by choice, they call it now. And but the sad thing is that those people they're quite anti-children, so it's like, when things go one extreme to the other.
Yeah, I always find with these things that if the pendulum swings one way, it swings too far in the other direction. And that's what you mean by this, I think. Childless by choice, but we don't like children. What about the middle ground where you're fine with children, but you just don't happen to have any just yet? You know what I mean? Yeah. Where's the middle ground here? It swings from one extreme to the other, I find.
And so I guess, Neil, like to put it succinctly, through writing this book, I wanted to claim my past, like my relationship, sexual past, and not be ashamed of it. And so to send it out as a message to other women that, it's okay. We all have a past.
Now, this is great. And this is what I really wanted to get into in just a moment. And indeed, not just women, all men have a past as well. Yeah. But I love the way you said owning it, and dealing with any shame that you have, because shame is generally given to us by other people, and it's generally based on what they think we should and shouldn't have done. And we can internalize that. And if I may stereotype a little, generally women tend to internalize more than men and take things more to heart, I would say, as a generalization, but that is not all in all cases, far from it. And they do carry around a lot of shame. And that in and of itself, I think that, shall we say, toxic shame would stop you having a good relationship with anyone, because you haven't got a good relationship with yourself.
Exactly. And I mean, I write about my mum in the book, not a huge amount, but and this, it's my assessment. I mean, there was never not that I'm aware of, a psychiatric assessment per se. So I have to, allegedly, my mum, I mean, I really do believe she had quite bad narcissistic personality disorder.
Now we talk about narcissism quite a lot on this program as well, and the thing with narcissists, for anyone
who hasn't met one,
I think we've probably all met one, but it depends how close you get to them, and I think there's a relationship between how close you get and how much it affects you, because narcissists will always make you feel like it's your fault, and they will probably believe it's all your fault, all the world's fault, or someone else's fault, missing the point completely that whenever there's an issue, there's a common denominator, them. And everyone can see that apart from them.
Yeah.
Let me put this comment on. We get some great comments. Can I introduce you to Dr. Asa Don Brown, who was a guest on the show this time last week, actually. Very high up in the psychiatric community in Canada and in the USA. And he's always got some wise words and very compassionate words as well. He's a great man. Clear. There's a very judgmental undertone being cast in such messages. And sometimes the speaker is completely unaware of their tone. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Well, I hope.
And from Elizabeth Green, expert in narcissists. We have a narcissism expert on the phone. And warm greetings from Dr. Asa Don Brown to you. Pleasure to connect with you.
Wonderful. Yeah. No, I'll have to watch that. I've watched a lot of your shows, but I didn't watch that one.
You poor misguided woman. Anyway.
I know.
I know. What can I do? So, yeah. And it's good to do that self-inquiry, isn't it? It's good because I think it's a journey we're all on. And the more you unearth, and it can be a little bit uncomfortable at times, but once it's dealt with, it's dealt with. And then you're free to pursue your life as you want to without being held down by this, if you like, burden of the past. So the past can be learned from and used, but not carried like an albatross around your neck, right? Like a millstone.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, to be honest, Neil, I think I have a little bit of I'm quite childlike in a way. And I sort of hoped that as soon as this book was out, it came out like 6 weeks ago. So in my mind, it's still pretty new. Is that I would feel like this kind of, oh, I'm completely free. But to be honest, I'm so much still very much on a day-to-day basis, a work in progress. And sometimes I will have like, I can feel a bit like that shame thing can get triggered really easily. But I think that's the gift of the narcissist. And it's like, if I start to feel vulnerable, it's like, then I'll find things that will make me feel, can I swear? Or feel
You can freaking swear as much as you want. We're not regulated here.
okay.
Go on.
Well, no, just make me feel shit about myself and take me into a downward spiral.
Well, it's very easy to do that. My inner critic can be absolutely brutal. But what I do find, if I get triggered with things in this healing process that I've been through, it comes less intensely, less regularly, and for less long. And the problem is when you have a trigger, it feels like all the work you've done has been set back to zero. Bang, that's it. Why did I even bother? It's not true, but it feels like that at the time. But if you can just remember, less intense, less regular, less long.
Yeah.
And if you put it over like a long timeline, almost like a visual of it, you can actually really see the progress that you've made. But we're all works in progress, aren't we?
Yeah, we are.
And we all need the right support to do it, the right safe space to do it, the right people around us. And that's important too.
Well, yes. And that is another really, like, I mean, for me, again, so that ties into like having really healthy, strong boundaries. I mean, I didn't know what a boundary was. You know, I'm still learning about boundaries, but I'm much better now at putting
I did get that. I did get that for reading your book. I think let's talk about it. Shall we talk about your book? Because obviously it's been a wonderful journey for you, and one so many could learn from. And I think if I'd have met you when you wrote the book at the age I would have been then, I wouldn't have understood the concepts in the book. I would have I don't know what I would have made of you. I don't know what you'd have made of me. But now I've read at least a good part of your book, I can understand it on a much deeper level, which I wouldn't have had previously. I don't know. Maybe maturity is dawning for me at last, although some would say it's probably not. Take us through your book and some of the boys that you knew. Just take us through it. Tell us the story and maybe a little takeaway from each one. If you learned something else that what you didn't want, and then.
Well, oh gosh, yes. Well, I did actually have rather a good first initiation into the world of love and sex. And that was with this public school boy. And that was okay that was good until he started cheating on me with my friends and or my circle of acquaintance. And I mean, I think that was a really good lesson in betrayal. But I think, unfortunately, it burst that naivety bubble. And it sort of, that sort of set up, because I think when someone cheats on you, you can't quite, it like sears your self-esteem and self-worth.
I think so. I think we go into things very innocently and almost like a child, but like a child, we're vulnerable. And I suppose when you're cheated on, most of us don't have the awareness, and if I'm wrong here, correct me, and I don't think you did at the time, to see maybe that was about him.
Oh no, I thought it was all about a reflection on me.
That's the point, and that's the belief you internalize, which you took forward, and that's the problem. It's what we believe about. We have experiences, then we form opinions and beliefs about it, and those beliefs aren't always correct, and that's where we get ourselves into trouble. And then we look even harder in the wrong direction when it'd be much easier to look for something in a different direction, which is a lot easier on the heart and soul, shall we say? Is that fair?
Yes, absolutely. And
you were saying, please carry on.
So you cheated. No, and then I will talk about an encounter, because this is where I think for me, which puts it into the time context, because obviously things are different in 2024, let's hope. So this was like in the, I'm in my early 50s. So like mid, late 80s, early 90s. So I got pregnant by mistake from a guy that I hooked up with a couple, 2-3 times.
Yeah.
And I felt such deep shame about getting pregnant. And I was 18. And I just, that was I didn't know where to turn. I didn't know who to speak to. I sort of went.
Exactly.
I mean, the nurse was shocked. You know, when they do that test and at the GP's clinic, and she just looked at me as if I must be really dense, and she was just like, "Well, didn't you notice something? You know, like obviously because
Oh, she had a good bedside manner then.
Well, I mean, my way of dealing with things was denial, and then obviously then I started using drugs, but that shame, like that really, after the betrayal with that first love, and never having any closure with that, I ended up pregnant, and I think that kind of really set the tone going forward for like the next 25 years really.
Because by that time, the shame was well and truly internalized, and it had become a belief, it had become a program that you were almost running on automatic. And I think that was the source, maybe in hindsight, of a lot of the troubles you encountered since that, because it was all running from a false premise in the first place.
Oh, totally.
If you like, and it takes digging into it to realize that all along it was a false premise. You've got nothing to be ashamed of. These are just experiences which you're now healing from, which is a totally much nicer way of framing it, isn't it? I suppose. But
well, yeah,
but and also back in the 80s, there was that shame about getting pregnant so young. There was that awful phase back in the 80s, and it annoyed me then and it annoyed me now, and I don't even like the term, but slut shaming.
Yes.
In other words, it was always the woman's fault. She's the temptress. She was probably a slut and she probably wanted it. You know what I mean? And that's been used to justify all kinds of unacceptable crimes. And I thought it was bullshit back then, and I think it's bullshit now. And I can even feel myself getting a bit angry even as I think about it now. But that was a thing back then to quite some degree, wasn't it? There was a cultural shame around it.
Oh, definitely. I mean, so much, Neil, to the point that my mum, so this is, you probably picked up that I've come from this quite obviously middle class background. And I did go to a public school called Heathfield, which was down the road.
It's the pot plant in the background that gives it away every time.
Is it? But yeah, so, in those circles, there's like the gossiping classes, to abbreviate. But I remember my mother saying to me, she was at a lunch at the Hurlingham Club, like some sort of fundraiser.
Yeah.
This isn't in the book. And there were some other mothers, and they all obviously had kids, we're all the same age, our sort of cohort. And they were talking about, these mothers were talking about these, it was a ladies' lunch, how badly behaved these girls were. And they were talking about girls at this school I'd gone to called Kirby Lodge, the sixth form college near Cambridge. Mm-hmm. And my mother, because she had a different name to me, because she was remarried, she actually asked if they'd ever heard about a girl called Clea Myers. And they, to check that I wasn't whoring around. And it was like, she told me.
So you were like the so-called, she was checking to see you weren't the scarlet woman of the area. Kind of thing.
Said that literally at 17.
So to not bring shame on the family, is that it?
Yeah. And it was like, but that's such, like, even that conditioned idea that, oh my God. And, some of these girls were, a lot of us was really struggling with self-worth. Even though externally, I think the one good thing, I don't know if you call it good, but from that public school, training school, you're very good at masking and you create a persona, but it's really not.
Well, this is it. This is what I found in my healing process recently. And I think the thing in common is we all create a mask, and it's a protective mask. And first you have to break through that mask. And then there's the sticky sore bits underneath which need healing. And under that is the gold.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
A phrase I love, written by one of my favorite authors. First we were fine, then we were defined, and now we're becoming refined. And that's got loads of levels in that. And I really like that.
I love that. Brilliant.
Yeah. Alan Cohen, he's a fantastic healing spiritual writer. One of my favorites, Alan Cohen. Brilliant. But anyway, it's that internalized cultural shame, and it doesn't do. And just a note. I mean, and I'm sure we've got psychological professionals listening, and I'm sure if we were to ask Dr. Asa a good way to deal with girls' low self-worth, it probably, at a guess, wouldn't be calling them a slut and checking they're not whoring around. I'm just guessing, just off the top of my head, possibly not the best approach. I mean, really?
I know, but then, so then what happened with me is I started to get a bit of a buzz out of being promiscuous.
Okay, now that's interesting. Why do you think that was?
Because it gave me, in some way, if I snogged, or what would we call it back then, getting off with someone, it was like if they were what in my sort of cohorts was considered cool and good looking guy, that would give me a boost. And I'd feel a bit high for, and that's not taking a drug or drink.
No,
I mean,
it boosts the ego, doesn't it? But I think the thing with the ego, and we all need an ego, nothing wrong with it. But if it's wounded, it can be like a kind of an empty hole. That's wrong choice of words. It could be like a void that you can't fill. Sorry, I'll edit that bit out, but you know what I mean. It's like a void that you can't fill.
Yes.
No matter how hard you try, you might, like a drug, it'll make you feel high for a bit, but then you need more of it the next time to get the same, and we become kind of addicted to it rather than healing the issue that caused us to need that in the first place, right?
Exactly. And also the come down, and I mean, so that was a little phase I had going around. There was this, it was a Sloane Ranger hangout nightclub it was called the 151 Club on King's Road. It was at 151.
I remember reading about that.
So I had the dubious honor of being given a membership when I was 16. So that kind of says it. Do you know what I mean? It was like when I should have been studying for my A levels, I was in the 151 Club every night. As you do. And my dad was, he was sort of a fan of laissez-faire parenting. Well, I've been at boarding school.
What does that mean, laissez-faire, for the unenlightened amongst us?
Well, so my dad basically let me do what I wanted.
Permissive, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he just was a very gentle, quiet, sort of academic person.
Yeah.
Divorced, quite, he was quite isolated person, and he just did not know how to deal with a hormonal teenager. I mean, understandably, but I was quite bombastic, and I think that was part of my persona. Like, I mean, I can't believe I even said this, but I would say things like, oh, I'm going to go and get laid tonight, and think it was cool. I mean, and now I'm looking back, I just think, wow, you really said that? I mean, it kind of boggles my mind, because I've never, for me as a woman, I can, it's never been about intimacy is something which is wonderful, but, sex for sex's sake, that's not ever really been my thing. I want to connect with someone on an emotional level, but so I did my best to connect with various people, but I think the attraction was based again on this getting self-esteem. Like if someone was really handsome, that was like a score, like, whoa, you've got, so there was this guy called, and because I've got to remember what I've called them in the book, this guy called Tarquin, who was
Tarquin, he was a character, wasn't he?
Devilishly handsome. But yes, I mean, I ended up paying for him to come out to, I was at this college in Boston, because I have all this family in the US, Russian American family, because I'm part Russian, who were quite supportive to me. And I think they could see I was very much flailing when they witnessed me and my dad in the UK. And so they encouraged me to come out to the US and sort of adopted me a little bit, but not in an honest way, if you know what I mean. Like, I was very much on my best behavior around them. I was never like really honest. Oh yeah, actually my life's a mess, and that kind of thing. I mean, I wouldn't have been honest.
People were keeping the mask on, weren't you?
Yeah. and I wouldn't have admitted. I mean, now we speak about things. Back then, we just didn't. It wasn't.
No.
It was, and
these kind of conversations weren't even really talked about. That all I remember in the 80s was terms like latchkey kids and things like that. Do you remember that?
Yes, latchkey kids.
Yeah. That was about, in most circles, the height of it. Or discussions down the pub, those self-righteous discussions. I blame the parents, and that was about the depth of it for me.
Yeah.
I remember. Really, we've got so much more psychology and insight now, and in a sense that's really good. But you were saying Tarquin. I mean, he took you for a right old ride, didn't he?
Well, he really did. And but you know what's quite telling, I think, is so after he basically stole because we'd been together at the cash point, and he'd seen my number, and then actually I asked him to go back and get something. We were at a football game, and we were with my American cousins, and he was visiting. Tarquin was visiting, and he was their guest for the weekend. And anyway, so he managed to work out he had my card number, and he nicked the card from my wallet when I was in class at this college, and he was staying with a friend of mine, and on her sofa, and even after he stole, I think it was $400, which back then was actually quite a lot of money.
It's not really about the money; it's the fact that he's stolen in the first place.
Well, exactly that, and I actually then went to visit with him. I saw him again and gave him the opportunity to explain, rather than and it was just the same old. There was other problems, that just kept. I mean, if it wasn't the money, then it was having, hooking up with other women. Or basically, there was no respect for me. I was just like an opportunity. Basically, I think he perceived me as an opportunity in the US because things weren't going well.
Yeah, I got the sense of that by reading about it in the book. He saw you as a bit of a meal ticket, didn't he?
Yeah. But I was, thinking, and that sort of naive, like romanticization. And I mean, the other clue would have been that actually he was not interested really in sex at all. I mean, he did go on to promote this sort of male, sexual testosterone enhancement sort of thing. And I'm obviously not in contact with him anymore. And he's not, I know he's not living in this country, so that's all right. And you know what? the other thing I have noticed, having written about real people before, Neil, is that oftentimes people don't recognize themselves when you write about them because maybe they're not in touch. I mean, obviously it's my perception, my memories. But yeah, I don't think because he did Tarquin did message me about 10 years ago. And again, it was like he wanted to know why I was always going to Goa and what was my connection. And did I know kind of influential people there that could help with
that sounds just like the same old Tarquin.
Yeah.
Yeah. Coming back for a bit more of a meal ticket. Sorry. Yeah, didn't it?
I mean, I did feel pleased with myself that I didn't respond and just, but not to, because it's, and then when I was at university, there were, a few other disasters, but along the same track. But then I think once I moved to Los Angeles and I was living in West Hollywood, so instead of sort of looking at me, I sort of thought, okay, well, obviously these kind of men, like these preppy, these sort of, I don't know, public schoolboy types, and then these sort of preppy ones from university, they're not right for me. So hence I met my neighbor who was, addicted to crystal meth. And I put him on this pedestal for a while and thought he was the bee's knees. And ended up following, he offered me crystal meth. I'd been flirting with cocaine a bit. And then, I ended up getting hooked on that.
How easy is it to get addicted to crystal meth? I've heard that just one shot can addict you. Is that true?
I mean, I think that's always a good headline, that one, isn't it?
It is. I just wanted to see if there's anything.
I mean, I think so. Anyone who's done cocaine will know, you're like in the bathroom every 20, 30 minutes. Well, probably not in the bathroom these days, but back then you were in the bathroom.
I remember going out for a drink with someone once, and he kept disappearing every 20 minutes, and then I worked out why.
Yeah. So I think for me with the crystal meth was, it lasts a good few hours, so you can snort. I mean, I was snorting it, so you could snort a line, and it kind of, it really fixes that look. I mean, you feel the high is, that first high is pretty unbelievable, unfortunately, because then that's what keeps you coming back for more. But by the time, I mean, I was flirting, and I didn't get hooked after one line. But as time went by, and also bearing in mind, crystal meth was cheap. It was poor man's, because of the it was all traded through Hells Angels. It was called poor man's coke, because it was inexpensive, unlike cocaine. But yeah, so it was tied up with that, with this guy, Jordan. I got more into the crystal meth. I mean, he'd already reached that point where he couldn't hold down a job and stuff, and was making, well, I believed him when he said, I mean, my naivety is kind of extraordinary to me now, but he told me he was, he did found object sculpture. He lived in a shack. It was basically a garage across the road. He didn't even have a loo. He did use my shower, which again, I mean, honestly, but I mustn't judge myself. Do you know what I mean? It's just, it is what it is.
No, because judgment in any healing process doesn't work. I think for any healing, the first step is awareness.
Yeah.
It's awareness, and that is a world of difference from judgment.
Yeah.
Awareness will raise you up and give you clarity. Judgment will make you wilt. It's as simple as that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Neil.
So absolutely do not judge yourself, because I find this conversation interesting and very, very insightful. I think just a conversation like this, if someone watched it at the right time, it could save them an awful lot of pain. And that's a wonderful thing. So thank you for taking your mask off. Thank you for being so honest, and please don't judge yourself, because you do not deserve it. Back to you.
Well, so this guy, Jordan, he was making these found object sculptures from dumpster diving, which was a big thing. I mean, now people even know what dumpster diving is. Back then it was quite new, or, jumping into skips, finding discarded things. One man's trash is another man's gold. So when he told me he had an exhibition at MoMA, the Modern Art Museum in New York. And I mean, I did believe him, because, I thought, these artworks, they're amazing. But obviously he was making his living through drug, dealing. And then I had a cat, and my cat sadly got run over. And I went to go and see him to get, I was looking for some consolation. And I could hear him with this porn star I'd met, say, the week previous, who, he was like, we're just friends, having a grand old time with her. And it's just horrible. But yeah, she had more, so that.
And at this point, how addicted were you to the crystal meth?
So I think I was, at that point, you could call it maybe excessive party use. Like I still had quite a good job in script.
So you were functional. You were functional with it.
Yeah, I was. I could go to work, but I mean, my boss had started to make comments, and I was quite good at lying as well. Well, my mum taught me well on that one, but I had this big thing about how I had such bad insomnia. That's why I always looked so blinking tired the whole time.
Mm.
And, this lovely man I was working for, he kind of makes suggestions like, have you tried, he was really big into transcendental meditation and things like, he was a really good man, actually, but he could see I was, he just kept saying, Clea, LA is full of wolves, you need to really have your guard up, And I was like, oh, of course I do. I know, but I was like, of course I do. I know better. But I didn't. But then I had so then I did, I made the big mistake back then of going, I had a screenplay I was working on. I'd optioned the rights to this Native American story. And, I did really want to be a screenwriter. And I then left working for this really wonderful exec producer and went freelance. So I was working as a runner. I trained as a continuity girl. I was terrible at that job.
Okay.
That was really bad. Didn't help showing up, high. But so things started to plummet as I had more time by myself.
And at what point did you go, right, enough's enough, I've got to get off this? And how did you do it?
Well, Neil, so actually, I mean, it went pretty down. I went very down. And I really kind of got enmeshed in the world, in that lower world. What ended up happening was I got taught, because I was like, oh, I kind of thought it was a bit cool. I mean, I know this, I don't know how or why. It was so different from what my upbringing, I suppose, like down in the hood. And, I was wearing
it feeds that kind of part of us that wants to rebel and write their own story on the world. And there's nothing wrong in that. It's just, I suppose, how it's done, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, it was, I was fortunate that I got out as unscathed as I did. But what ended up happening was I did what back then was called washing checks. So, with like in a checkbook. So I was with these two guys, and again, like I wasn't involved with either of them, but they used me to go actually. So we washed the checks with some kind of like peroxide solution, I believe it is. And then just, you could jump in the dumpsters at the bank, get their rubbish and the discarded checks, and then you could just go over, you could change the amount and, basically switch them up with this dye. But,
and represent them and cash them, essentially.
Exactly, represent and cash. And I didn't even, this is, these two guys are like, okay, so you're going to be the person going in the bank. So basically I was the person taking all the risk. They found the checks, but I would go in and present the checks, and we'd split the money 3 ways. But I was the one taking all the risk. But no, did I realize that at the time? No, because I wasn't a very good criminal. So the second time we did it, I got caught because the check was really ropey looking, and I'd been up for about 4 days and looked like shit. And the woman pushed that buzzer they have, and the police came and hauled me off. First time I'd ever been arrested. Well, that was a shock for me. As far as I know, I'm probably the first person in my family to be arrested. It was a shock to the system, and also just being held in a cell with other women who were, street workers. They were all drug addicts and street workers.
And the American justice system can be quite brutal, can't it?
It's harsh, yeah. LA has zero tolerance policy, or it did back then. So that was pretty horrific. And after that night in jail, and then they were like, well, you're going to have to come back to court in, a month. And I decided that that was a big enough wake up call for me to have that night in the cells and be completely up. By that point, at that
point, you're right. This is it. I'm going to turn my life around somehow. Was that the thought?
Somehow, yeah. Yeah. And I made a call to a cousin of mine who lived in New York. And I said, I've fucked up big time. I've really made a mess. And I don't know what else to do. I've got this court date. I just, I didn't know what to do. Anyway.
And what were you facing? What would have been the penalty you could have been facing?
So at that point, I didn't know this, but at that point, they would offer, if you were willing, they call it diversion. So that's like you agree to go into a drug rehab program.
Okay.
So, I mean, they do give you that one chance. But then, so I did go into a drug rehab. But then, of course, you know, you meet, so the thing about drug rehabs, you meet more experienced drug users.
There is that.
And I wasn't quite, it was all going swimmingly. But I just wasn't quite finished with my I basically relapsed after about 6 months. I mean, a lot of it was time. It was a bit of a tricky time, Neil, because again, I dreamed that my mum would come through for me, but she was kind of at that point where she wouldn't really speak to me, and she was deeply ashamed that I'd bought this, you know, that I was, what, to her mind, behaving like a complete lunatic, but bringing shame on her. That's how she was just like, you're making
that's
me.
not, it's not the first time she thought you did that. I mean, the last time
Yeah.
she was checking to see if anyone knew you. So she had this shame on the family thing going on for quite a long time before that.
Well, and I think it was visited on her by her mum.
Right.
You know, and this whole idea, because her mum had been married to this rubber planter out in Malaya, but
Right.
that their divorce became very toxic. And he spread a rumor around that she was a high-class call girl. And I don't know if that was, you know, we don't know if it was true or not. I mean, knowing my granny, it could have been. I don't know. Not that matters, but back to me, it doesn't matter if she was or she wasn't. But obviously back then.
But what does matter is that shame was projected onto you.
And it was like I imbibed it.
And that does matter.
Yeah. And then it was like just kept doing things that would obviously have a negative response. And then, but I did meet this wonderful guy called Peter who tried to help me. He really tried, and he supported me. He was quite positive, and he was actually a really good influence. And he was like, no, the best thing is if you go into do this rehab, Clea. He said, there's no way I can deal with you as you are now. But if you get clean and work a good recovery, you know, we can give it a go. Well, because he was really nice.
Hang on, give it a go, as in he was going to give you a job, or as a partner?
As a relationship, as a
love.
Lovely.
Okay.
Yeah. But, you know, someone being really kind and understanding, I sort of put that block in and I found someone else who was, I mean, I did relapse, and I knew, well, he wouldn't like that. You know, it was on, any relationship would be on condition of, you know, maintaining a good recovery from addiction. And anyway, I went off and found someone else to obsess about and use with, who I met in a Narcotics Anonymous meeting. But, you know, if you're looking for it was like, I think I was a bit flitting around. I was a bit also the crystal meth really does damage the brain. I mean, it takes, from what I've read recently, it takes over 2 years, at least minimum 2 years, if you've been taking it excessively, to really get those neural pathways working in any, you know,
the right balance of brain chemicals as well, like all your dopamines and serotonins and all these things.
Yeah, because there was always this and I still struggle with it today, actually, is this tendency, sort of depressive tendency. So yeah, but obviously using drugs, I mean, that's just creates even more problems on top of what's going on internally.
It does, and we take the drugs to numb out the problems that we're feeling, but it creates, I think the medical term is comorbidity, which is a horrible term, but
it is horrible.
It's a horrible term, but it's fairly accurate as well, isn't it? Because I've had dear friends that have turned to alcohol to try and numb how they feel, and one's still with us and the other one isn't, unfortunately. So I know what it can do, but it's so. Again, it's understandable, because you're going through a lot of pain and confusion, and the answers aren't apparent. We didn't have the insight that we've got now. It just wasn't there. If anything, you'd be charting your own path, and that's really hard to do in a city like LA when you've got an addiction like that. I mean, that's quite a big ask, to be fair.
It is, because everyone there they've got their mask firmly on. Do you know what I mean? Because they're all people flood in there on a daily basis to make it in Hollywood, whether it's as an actor, model, writer, dancer, singer, whatever it is in the sort of creative industries. And everyone's, we're all like, I'm fine. You're not going to let out the truth. I mean, that is good. I mean, I have to say the recovery meetings in LA were fantastic in terms of, because, the new age movement really kicked off there, or in California. So they were talking about things that were new to me, and like the whole self-help movement.
When you say new age, what do you mean by that? I know, by the way, we talk about NLP a lot on this show, and that came from California in the late 60s. That all began.
I
With a
didn't
couple
much
of breaks.
about NLP. Well, like
it was created by a mathematician and a linguist, and the mathematician likened our mind to a program, hence the maths, and the linguist was the language we use can tell what's going on internally, and together that became neuro-linguistic, and then programming. The bit was if someone's done it, anyone can do it. What's their strategy? Teach that strategy to someone who hasn't got the strategy. In other words, teach them how to use their brain and mind rather than try and find out the why.
Yes.
It's the how they're doing it rather than the why. There was 150 schools of psychology back in the day, all arguing about how to treat people, and none was succeeding. And these two mavericks, one in particular, Richard Bandler, absolute bad boy genius maverick, came along and revolutionized it, pissed the rest of the industry off because he was getting results that no one else could. He'd be going into mental hospitals and doing things that would never be allowed today, but curing people. Anyway, enough about that. Back to you.
It's interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, that was, and then my experience, I actually had to leave. I was unofficially deported from LA.
Okay.
Because I did relapse onto the crystal meth, and long story short, I ended up stealing a van, and I got arrested, and they were like, this time you're looking at 2 years inside. So I probably would have served a year, but I spent 2 weeks in jail, and I can say categorically that was the worst experience of my life, because I was coming down. I was weighing about 95 pounds. So I was, really skinny.
What's that in
stone?
Other measurement? Yeah.
Yeah, like 5 stone, something.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Oh goodness. Right.
I mean, I weigh like 11 stone now, which is I'm normal for my height and everything.
Yeah.
I could probably. Well, let's not get into that whole. Oh, I should be. The whole losing
You're
weight.
fine as you are, and very unique as a woman for freely sharing how much you weigh. I've never met a woman like that before.
Well, the good thing is you can't see me from the, it's like back in lockdown, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not even wearing any trousers, Kept the lockdown habits going,
I quite missed the lockdown, actually. It was quite nice.
Well, there were some good things that came out of it. There was no crime reported. The skies were so much cleaner, and we all slowed down a bit. Pause the story there for a minute. Hold the thought, though, because we've got some really nice comments coming in, which I'd like to share with you. Paul Claridge, who's a fine man. Wow, Clea, a lot of what you're saying is very similar to the experiences of a dear friend of mine. She's gone through disastrous relationships, fell for, in her words, the wrong men, and had a bad relationship with a controlling parent. She suffered mentally, had to be sectioned a few years ago and have counselling. She still has issues and occasionally chases relationships with men who want, for a better phrase, user and dumper. Then we, her friends, have to, and he's run out of space. I'm saying pick her up. You can add the rest of that if you like. I'm guessing he's saying pick up the pieces. If I'm wrong, correct me, Paul. Dr. Asa John Brown, sharing the love for Paul, who says,
Oh,
Asa, I believe in being there for friends that have been there for me, and true friends support each other through good times as bad. These two are having a mutual agreement session, and I agree with them both. Liz, your description of Tarquin rings so true. I've had relationships where I was essentially a meal ticket, and I have friends who have had similar experiences. And sadly, because me and my friends are generally lovely and good people, they want to see the best in people and don't immediately notice if someone is an arsehole. See, it's fine to swear on this show. 100% agree, Paul. I am that friend even when it's tough. Now, Asa, Clea, you should check out the works by Dr. Craig Malkin. I know him on a personal level, and he's a gem of a person. He's an expert in the field of narcissism and toxic relationships. And Clea, you are a remarkable individual.
That's rather lovely. Thank you, Asa.
This man is, as I say, very senior in the American and Canadian psychiatric community. It's Dr. Asa, Don Brown. He's just put Asa there. Elizabeth Green says, meal ticket, that's me. Elizabeth says, I hope you've forgiven yourself along the way. You were so much more functional than me. Liz, ditto. And one more. Clea, referring back to my Paul Claridge, referring back to my earlier comment, your story is similar to a dear friend of mine being so honest about her issues. Thank you for being so open, honest, and brave. And hey, this channel and group is totally non-judgmental. And if it's permitted, I can send you a virtual big hug. I guess we can allow that.
I love
There we
it.
go.
Thank you. I love hugs. Those are fantastic comments. And I read yesterday that for good mental health, we need 8 hugs a day.
Do you know it takes 7 seconds for a hug to release oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone? So it has to be non-sexual 7-second hug to release oxytocin.
Okay. Because I mean, Neil, for me, back at this time that I was talking about when I lived in LA, like it was anathema to hug. I mean, I did get more in the groove with it of doing those recovery meetings because that was a very.
Well, they weren't huggy in LA. I would imagine that was all mwah, mwah, darling, and huggy.
Well,
No?
the air kissing, yes, but the huggy, the genuine hugs that was just in the recovery rooms of Narcotics Anonymous. That I mean, I have to say that was a great experience for me. They were really, I learned a lot. About being human. I didn't put it into practice then. I needed to go on more going a bit more down, because when I came back here, I'd then taken up acting because I did a bit of commercial modeling out in LA because I got so thin. I was all sucked up. It was the heroin chic look back then.
Oh, I remember that. That was back in the 90s, wasn't it?
Yeah, like mid 90s. Yeah.
That's right. I remember it. What a terrible idea that was foisted on us. That looked good, but there you go.
Well, I'd internalized that whole thing around, and the thing which is interesting about Hollywood is I'd never had body issues before I moved there, or that I was aware of, and it was suddenly all about how you look, how thin you are. And I mean, I would have met people, men would say, oh, you'd be good. You would look good if you lost, like you need to lose weight off your hips. And, like those sort of comments. And it'd be like, I've never experienced anything like that. Where it was, like open, so anyway, I definitely took that on. And I put, that was a big attraction to getting involved with that particular drug. It's a high-powered speed, which I think you'll hear a lot of people say that was one of the motivating factors. Women, at least. Well, actually, not only women, but I mean,
it's just an impossible ideal, isn't it? I've even heard judgmental terms. It's groups of American girls talking, and they differentiate between an LA 10 out of 10 and an Ohio 10 out of 10. An Ohio 10 out of 10 is not as good looking, apparently, as an LA 10 out of 10. And it's just impossible. Well, let's just say none of it promotes self-acceptance. No. I imagine you would have learned that more in the recovery rooms where you were given, you said learning about being human, and part of the recovery, I think, is allowing yourself to be human and to have human emotions and to feel what you feel. and to be okay that you feel what you feel. Because if you don't own it, you can't process it and you can't change it. And all the time you're just saying, oh, I'll feel good when my body's this way, it's just going to spiral and get worse and worse, I would imagine, right?
Yes. And also you're getting all your self-esteem out, like what I was getting my self-esteem through how I looked. And it was like... And
not only look to yourself, look to other people. I think, do you know the author Wayne Dyer? He made a really good point on this. Great metaphysical writer. He's no longer with us now. And he'd call that other esteem. That's not self-esteem. That's other esteem. That's based on what other people think of you, not you.
Yes, exactly. That's perfect. I like Wayne Dyer a lot. I like his...
I did. I read a lot of his work. Very, very funny man as well. Very cheeky ego, which I thought was great in his writing. Anyway, you were saying.
Yeah. So then... So I was forced, well, I had a choice, serve time, because, obviously in LA with the zero tolerance, I was there on an H1 visa, being British. So they were like, well, you can go back to your own country and deal with, you need to sort yourself out. And they were checking on that. I had to have annual, and then the first 2 years I was back, I had to send clean drug tests over to get my record cleared, so to speak. Anyway,
so you'd be welcome, so you could go back if you wanted to.
Well, no, just so that I did because they did make a bit of a special case for me, because they didn't want me to be in their prison system where
they're still checking on you when you're back in the UK.
Yeah, that was I had my family were not willing to pay for any legal help at that point. I had a state attorney. And she said, I can see you're not a bad person. You're not a stupid person. You've messed up here, but you can sort it out. I don't think jail is the right place for you. I was not going to be, it was, that was, for want of a better word, a godsend. That lady was a godsend. But I came back to the UK, and then I had this, I was like, oh, actually, no one knows how spectacularly I messed up. So I can just pretend I've come back and everything's fine. But I was not well. And I dabbled in other drugs, and I was drinking too much and just not behaving great. And I did get involved with a comedian who, again, was very kind to me. But, anyone who was, it was like, that became like an anathema. It was like the power dynamic shifted, where this particular man, who's a very nice man, he put me like on a bit of a pedestal.
He put you on the pedestal. Okay.
And I didn't like that. I was very uncomfortable with it. He actually wanted to...
Many people are. They say that's a mistake in dating, putting anyone on a pedestal for any reason.
Yeah, it made me very uncomfortable. And and also I remember he was very keen to get married and have a family. Now, having children is always, that's only now when I can't have children do I actually, I'm quite sad about that, because I wish, but you can't change this life. That's not going to happen, and that's fine. But, I've had to grieve it a bit. But yeah, when this lovely young comedian started going on about kids, and I think it ignited to me, mothering and motherhood, because my mother, I found she was actually very scary. I was very frightened of her. It made me fearful, and I actually ended up shutting down my own ovaries when I was about 38. So they just stopped releasing eggs or whatever they do, and prematurely. And so that ended, that was not an option for me, which was, I'm not saying I wouldn't have been a good mother at that point. It would take another, say, 10 years to really do that internal work.
Good point to ask this question, actually, because I'm mindful of time. This hour has whizzed by. Nice. What work did you do on yourself, says Elizabeth Green? Talk us briefly through your healing process and how you've got to because we had a phone conversation. You said you're in a good place today, which is great to
Yes.
see, by the way. So how did you get there? Take us through your process,
Well,
if you will.
through my process. So I was part of a 12-step program for about 12 years. And I worked those steps a couple times, and they were very helpful to a certain point. But I was still struggling with depression. The black dog would come and visit more often than I would like. So I saw quite a few therapists over the years, but I finally found one in 2013 that I'm still working with him. So I see him every 2 to 3 weeks. And sometimes I'm like, oh, actually, no, can we do it every 2 weeks? Other times, it just depends. So it depends on the internal weather. But yeah, we did a lot of work around my mum because she chose to end her life. So, and that was, for me, that was tough because I had it by that. I mean, that happened like 7 years ago. And her husband had just died of lung cancer 6 months before she died. But right before he died on the telephone, he actually predicted, he said, Clea, she will not stick around for more than 6 months. He said, I can guarantee that. And I was, again, maybe this naive thing in me wanting to believe the best. I was thinking, oh no, now he's passed, my stepfather, because it was very much two's company, three's a crowd. I'm an only child with them. And there was a lot of triangulation going on.
Just explain triangulation. That's a term used in a lot of narcissistic study, isn't it? Triangulation.
Yes. Well, it's like.
Can you just explain that for us?
Yeah. Well, I see it as this ganging up on, and it moves around. So it'd be like my mother and stepfather against me, or my stepfather and me against my mother. That was the one that she was always projecting. Oh, is
that a bit like the drama triangle of victim, rescuer, persecutor?
Yes, exactly. Yes, it is. Yes. But she was actually the persecutor, but would never own that role. But yes, so I'm just thinking, so working with my therapist, I think finding a good therapist, and I think one should shop for a therapist. I mean,
I was gonna say it can take a while to find the right one, but when you do.
Because we're all different, and it's who, it's just chemistry and, obviously how they work. And so working with him, and also quite honestly, I think writing this has helped. I mean, I'm not, but it has, because it's enabled me to look through those patterns. Like, basically, they weren't, a couple were, I suspect, were narcissists, but it was me accepting abusive behavior, basically toxic, abusive
because
behavior.
You didn't feel you deserved any better or had anything to compare it to.
Exactly. And I've witnessed a lot of that. I mean, my mum and stepdad.
You've grown up in it. It's been in your environment. You've witnessed it. Why wouldn't you take that on for yourself? But I'm so pleased that you've written the book, that you're on your healing journey, and you see that, much better things are, if they weren't before, but they certainly are now, available to you. And that's a great message for anyone watching this. I'm just mindful of the time. Any relationship on the cards at the moment? I have to ask.
Well, no, good question. I'm dating a little bit, but no, I haven't connected in that way yet with anyone. Yeah. But one thing I do, Neil, and this is because we talked about dating apps on the phone, is I try to take myself out at least once a week to some sort of thing, whether it's an art show, a private view, or I don't know, anything where you meet people that's social. Like obviously not the cinema, it can be anything, but just where I'm going to meet people that I don't know.
Where are you based?
So I'm living in North Kensington, just off Ladbroke Grove.
We'll have to get you along to one of my comedy gigs. I think I'm doing downstairs at the King's Head at some point. And I've got one in Hamworth on Thursday, if you fancy it.
Where's Hamworth? Is that near Richmond? No.
Ish. Feltham, Richmond, that kind of area, ish.
Well, no, the King's Head, I know.
Yeah, downstairs the King said I'm there in August with a colleague of mine, Emily Kate Owen,
Okay.
who's a DJ colleague of mine, presenter colleague of mine.
Well, put me on the list, please.
All right, you're on. It's been lovely talking to you. Your book, Some Boys I Knew, Clea Myers, it's available on all the platforms, is it?
Yes, it is on all the platforms. Some bookshops, Daunts in Holland Park, and I'm trying some Waterstones.
It's a fascinating, insightful read, and I really, really recommend it. And I'm really glad we've had this conversation. What's next for you? What's next for you? Where's the muse striking next?
I'm moving into fiction now. I think I've mined my own life. Enough of me. Let's just create some fun fiction.
And do you love it? Do you love the writing process?
I do. Well, I can find it can be quite hard, but in terms of just the discipline, and it's a lot of work, writing. I don't know. Sometimes I feel people don't quite. Well, for me, it's a lot of work.
No, I know someone that's written the book, and it is a lot of work. It's a hell of a lot of work. It's no way around it.
It's so obviously when you have the book in your hand, it's a great feeling. It's wonderful. And if people get something from it,
there are a ton of insights in there. Clea, please keep in touch with us. Feel free to come back on the show at any point. We'd love to have you back at some point in the future. And I'll let you know about the comedy gig if you want to meet some people you don't know, some strange comedian type people.
Oh, I love comedians.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, look, thank you so much for being on. If you could leave us with this, if someone's watching this, and let's just say they've had similar experiences or really difficult, colourful relationships, what bit of advice would you give them?
That it's really a question. It's to do that inner work and to understand what the patterns are working within yourself.
Yeah.
And actually one other, I didn't mention this, Neil, which is a big part of it with my healing journey, is that I've been a practicing Buddhist for about 20 years. So I chant the same one as Tina Turner. I chant Namyo Horenge Kyo. So that's like polishing your internal mirror. And then when you feel good about yourself internally, obviously that's, reflected back in your life, and you start manifesting.
And it all starts, like you say, from the internal. And I'm sure Buddhism is very much about acceptance and self-acceptance. Yeah. Why was the Buddha terrible at hoovering?
You tell me.
Because he had no attachments. Thank you very much.
Brilliant.
I'll leave you with that. Lots of love. It's been great talking to you. Clea Myers, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
What an absolutely great guest. Russ is going to be here on Friday with Phil, Dave and the crew. I'll see you next Monday. Love you, huggy, squeezer. Take care.